Wednesday, 1 o'clock rock. I'm Jay Fidel. This is Think Tech. We have a new show. It's called The Military in Hawaii. And with us, we have the host of that show who's going to be taking over this discussion. And he's Captain Jeff James, retired Navy captain, had a sterling career, and spent a lot of time in Hawaii. So he knows about the connection between the military and Hawaii. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Well, thanks, Jay. Thanks for having me here. And I look forward to being able to host this show. I think it's important. There's a lot of things that I think will be interesting for folks not in the know about the military, and I think even people in the military will find it interesting as well.
Yeah, part of our community. I remember we had a program. In fact, you were in the program last year, a year ago. We called it the Military in Hawaii or some such. And in looking at it at the beginning, I found, to my surprise, that Pearl Harbor was actually established, I think it was before 1850. It became a base later on,
right?
But as a harbor, it was established, and it sort of evolved into a military harbor. And by 1874, it was a U.S. military harbor. That's really interesting, and it became part of the fabric of the state.
Right.
You commanded that Pearl Harbor, yeah?
I did. I
don't want to reveal anything special, but he commanded Pearl Harbor.
That was my last job in the Navy. It was a
enough.
great job, probably the best job I had, by and far. And Pearl Harbor, I mean, is very rich in history. And, if you go back before the Navy was there, what the harbor brought to the table for the local Hawaiians. I mean, it was named Pearl Harbor because there was pearls, there was oyster beds. It's a lot different today. The Navy ended up cutting a channel through the reef, to allow deep draft vessels to come into the harbor. And so it's kind of grown with the culture and with the public here. The Navy put a base there back it started in the early 1900s, and then, history reveals that in the late 30s, when things were going south in the East Pacific, maybe this is a place that we wanted to have a larger naval presence and a larger military presence to defend the U.S. in case of an attack, which obviously occurred. And since then, we've identified that, having a presence here in the middle of the Pacific really sends a strong signal to both potential adversaries as well as to our allies and our friends. And so it just came together naturally, and it's been awesome being here. And the command tour at the base was incredible because not only the military piece of it and being able to support the fleet and the Air Force, because we made it a joint base, so supporting both services, but really the ties with the community and kind of branching out and being able to understand what's going on across the broader Hawaiian landscape.
Yeah, it's a really interesting base, a really interesting job. I want to be clear that between the two of us, only one of us was the commander of Pearl Harbor. Exciting. I mean, I spent some time there. When I first got into the service in the Coast Guard, they assigned me to the Navy. And I went to the 14th Naval District, and I tried cases of, on prosecution, trial counsel, and defense counsel. In those days, the cases were 99% AWOL and drugs, small drugs, not big drugs.
Right.
And we went through these cases at a rapid rate. And the guy, I don't know if you ever met him, who was my adversary in all these cases, a guy named Dave Brahms. He was a Marine, and later became the chief lawyer in the Marine Corps. Yeah, quite something.
I never met him.
Yeah. Those were the days, 1965 it was. And indeed, even then it was clearly a major part of the social structure of these islands. And people saw it as, I think they still should see it, but they saw the military as one of the legs of the stool that kept the local economy going. There was agriculture in the plantations, there was the military, there was tourism.
Right.
I think I caught it all.
So probably that's a two-legged stool now. Agriculture, seemingly is dwindled down. Tourism's the number one industry here, with the military, the close second. And so when you talk about kind of the impact the military has, I mean, there's something north of maybe 75,000 military folks here, and then you add on the dependents. So it's got a fairly substantial economic impact. Just take, for example, just on my base that I had, you look at the shipyard. So the shipyard, Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, is the largest industrial employer in the state. I mean, there's over 4,500 civilians from the Hawaiian community that work at that shipyard. And so that puts bread on the table for 4,500 families. And they've got a very strong connection with the University of Hawaii and their apprenticeship program. So it provides an opportunity for people to have upward mobility. Perhaps they come from a background that doesn't enable them to afford college on their own. But through this apprenticeship program, it gives them a seat at the table to get in, get training, get education, and then have a career. And it's something that keeps them here local. There's a big push towards keeping the intellectual capital of Hawaii in Hawaii. A lot of folks want to leave when they grow up because they don't see a future. But the military and the shipyard in particular gives them that opportunity and gives them that future. And so we're trying to make sure that people understand that.
Yeah, and I mean, a good part of my wife's family started working in the shipyard back, during or after the war, and have continuously worked in the shipyard. I mean, it's spawned their lives, careers, supported their children in school, all that stuff. It's been a great source of nutrition for a lot of local people over the years.
Right.
It's a big industry, and it's a great employer. And right now today, we have one of our directors, a local woman, very well trained, is working at Pearl Harbor Shipyard as a nuclear engineer, and that's something.
It's incredible. I mean, when you think about nuclear engineers, most people, what comes to mind is, probably a 45-year-old male, with a button-up short sleeve shirt, sitting in front of at a desk with that.
She can't be 30.
Yeah, I mean, so the opportunities, irregardless of your demographic background, irregardless of your sex, any of that kind of stuff are there when you come into that kind of an environment.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about shipyards, and I'm not like trying to push the shipyard, but it's a great example, and it really kind of, you can extrapolate this across much of what happens in the military and the federal government. But the shipyard, as much as it's industrial, it's also incredibly high tech. And it takes more than just guys pounding rivets into the side of a ship and welding. It takes a lot more high-tech skills and, the computer engraving, the computer lathing machines, and the tolerances that are necessary for the high-tech machinery and the submarines, and the quality assurance that goes into the work there. I mean, it really requires a very sophisticated and educated workforce. And it does not care what color your skin is. It doesn't care what your sex is. It doesn't care what your ethnic or religious background is. It cares that you've got intellect and that you've got a willingness to go do something. And at the end of the day, that's people making a contribution in their own way towards national defense. You don't have to wear a uniform to contribute to national defense. Yeah. And I think that's a message that people should know.
Yeah, that's really important, because I think people. Oh, I don't know if it was always thus. I mean, when I came here because of the service, because of Vietnam. There was a sort of an openness to the military. I mean, there's stories about the Massey case back in the 30s and all that, but the reality is the local people liked the military, and they opened their hearts and their minds and their homes and their daughters. I married a local woman. And it was an open place. And I think, I don't know, maybe that's changed now. Maybe people are not so accommodating to the military. Maybe not so in tune with them, in line with them. And part of the reason of the show, I think, is to demonstrate that they got to put their pants on one leg at a time, and that they're our neighbors and friends, and they help us, and the whole federal presence here helps us. And I always say that the government is us. We are the government.
Yeah, and to your point about the openness of people here towards the military, I've had the absolute opposite experience. I've had nothing but openness.
That's great.
Nothing but welcoming. A little bit about me, my background. I mean, I grew up on the water. I've been a surfer my whole life, so being stationed in Hawaii.
Still doing it.
I still do it, yes. I just went yesterday, and my board's in my car, so maybe after work, after a long day's work, just before the sun sets, I might get in the water. But, out in the water with a bunch of people you don't even know. I never say what I do or who I am until you sit down and you talk story with them, and over the course of years, people find out, hey, you're in the Navy, you're a captain in the Navy. They're like, we would have never thought. And so my point is, people are very open and very receptive and welcome to military people. The thing about military people relative to maybe the general population, not everybody, but by and large, they're rule followers. They're people that do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
law-abiding citizens,
Yeah.
you know, trying to do something, you know, trying to make something of their life and trying to advance a cause. And so, you know, it blends well into any, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're on the West Coast, whether you're in, you know, Norfolk, Virginia, or here in Hawaii. The difference in Hawaii, though, is because we're so isolated. I mean, the most isolated landmass in the world. You know, everybody kind of has to get along, and everybody does get along. And so that Ohana spirit really kind of transcends into the military. And that was, you know, when I was the base commander, you know, that was the thing that I liked the most, the opportunity to officially, you know, kind of lead the charge, if you will, with community relations, whether it was, you know, doing a makahiki event on base to recognize and to celebrate and to understand Hawaiian culture, to, I don't know, doing things with the University of Hawaii.
Yeah.
I mean, so the opportunities were wide open, and the welcomeness and the receptiveness of the population and, you know, just everybody, I thought was incredible. And that's what really drove me and my family to decide to stay here and make this our home, because
Big
it feels
decision,
like home.
you know. You know, I remember too that when I first got here, my boss, who was a wonderful man, he said, you can't possibly understand Hawaii until you go to Japan. He says, I'm ordering you to go to Japan. You have to go to Japan, familiarize yourself with Japan. You don't have to do anything, just look around. How about that for a set of orders? So first thing I did is I went to, well, it was on a C-123, which was a really small old World War II plane where you could watch the rivets pop out, you know, out of the fuselage. And we stopped at Wake Island. Wake Island was an FAA, you know, telecommunications site at the time. And I got to talk to the people there. And what I learned from them is really interesting, which I didn't know, was that islands have their own sociology. Islands have their own way of doing things. And Wake Island was 2,800 people at the time. It was not that big. Everybody knew each other. And, you know, you don't talk stink. It says, hey, does this sound familiar? And you get along with everybody, and you know, try to be inclusive, not exclusive, and life is better for everyone. And Wake Island was kind of a model of that. The FAA ran it, the federal establishment. So then I come back to, you know, Hawaii in order to, you know, take my job and do the work that I was now prepared to do. And I find that all the rules that applied to Wake Island applied in Hawaii as well. Maybe on a, you know, different scale, but it was the same thing. And I think that's part of the quality of life, the values, special values of these islands. It's not limited to Native Hawaiians. It's everyone has to get along because it's an island, and the rules about the sociology of an island apply. And that's one of the things that appeals to you, and it also appeals to me. And so we all in the same canoe. You know?
Yeah, yeah. You know, and your point about, you know, how connected everybody is. I mean, there's the joke about everybody's 7 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. I don't know, he got picked to be the guy, but I mean, here, my observation here, there's about 2 degrees of separation between everybody at the most, and in some cases, not even that.
Yes.
So, you know, kind of cooperating to graduate, getting along. I mean, you can see it, even though I think I saw a news article that talked about traffic in Hawaii, which everybody will acknowledge, you know, can certainly sometimes be a headache. I think Hawaii was recently ranked as the 6th worst traffic in the U.S. But the courtesy that people display, the just common courtesy, the politeness with respect to driving, even in horrendous traffic, you know, says something about kind of this island lifestyle and that Ohana spirit.
Yeah.
And I mean, you don't ever see anybody on the horn, and if they are, you know that they're not from here. They're probably a tourist or, you know, maybe a military person that just got stationed here and hasn't been, you know, properly acclimated to how you act on the highway. But you know, you can use that and you can kind of spread that across almost everything here. And it's you know, it's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, it's a great partnership. And, you know, the military to me has provided an enormous number of public officials. You know, you go back through the years, you find a lot of successful public officials were retirees from the Navy and other military services. You find in staffing all around town. I mean, I practiced law for 40 years. I really liked military wives who came in and acted as secretaries. I told you that. They were, you know, dutiful. And something you mentioned earlier about following the rules, you know, and being trained and valuing training and education and critical thinking. They, you know, most of them had that, so they were a good bet to hire. Let's take a short break.
Sure.
This is Jeff James. We're doing the military in Hawaii, namely sea changes in the military. We'll be back to talk about sea changes when you're on active duty, which is very interesting. We'll be right back.
Aloha, namaskar, and hello. My name is Anu Hittel, and I host a show, Climate Change Beyond Outrage. In it, we go beyond outrage to look at solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. Join me every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Hawaii Standard Time. See you then.
Hi, my name is Stan Osserman, and I host the show every Friday here on Think Tech Hawaii called Stan the Energy Man. We talk about everything energy, from anaerobic digesters to batteries to hydrogen fuel cell and grid power. And we do that to keep you informed on the latest technology that's out there and the things that are going on in Hawaii. We broadcast every Friday from noon until 1 o'clock, and I hope you'll tune in. So sometimes we'll be on Think Tech, and sometimes we'll be on Olelo Channel 54, and I'd like you to listen in to me and join me every Friday. We'll see you then. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live with Jeff James, retired Navy captain, and we're talking about the military community in Hawaii, sea changes in the military, sea changes for the guys on active duty. You know, the service has changed as the world has changed. And, you know, being prepared for war, which, you know, has to be a major function and mission of any military organization, that's changed. The world has changed. It's changing today, every day.
Right.
and, you know, terrific that the U.S. really, and you got to recognize this, has changed also. You talk to a graduate of one of the academies now, and he will tell you about how much he's learned about world events and about, you know, global process and how the military is much different than it was years ago, say, during World War II. It's just way different. Can you talk about that?
Sure. You know, Jay, I grew up in a military family. My dad was a career naval officer. And so, you know, the 60s, the 70s, I mean, I grew up looking up, seeing the Navy, sometimes getting forced to go on dependence cruises when I didn't really want to, but, you know, being able to see kind of what he was going through. And then, you know, when I got out of high school, I really didn't have a plan. So I was looking for something to do. And I just remember my dad always telling me, hey, you know, he would talk about sailors, you know, guys that had no future would come into the service and get some training, get some education, and get kind of pointed in the right direction. And so while I was looking for what it was that I wanted to do, and I didn't know exactly what it was, I thought, okay, worst case, why don't I just join the service? And when I told my parents that, they were like, what? You are, son? We DNA test you if you're talking like that, mister, because you had always promised you wouldn't. But just to throw caution to the wind, I did. And so, you know, what I've seen over the last 30 years that I've been in the Navy, or well, a year and a half ago when I got out of the Navy, but, you know, over the course of my adult life, you know, when I compare and contrast that to kind of the way it was when I was being raised, you know, a couple of things come to mind. The first is kind of the Navy's commitment to people and the family. So much more than just, you know, the mission. And I used to hear things like this, and, you know, when I first came in the Navy, you know, we don't care about your wife or your girlfriend. They didn't come with your sea bag. Get to the ship and do your job.
We don't encourage you to get married. We don't encourage you to have children. Just do your job.
So that has really changed. And I mean, at one point there was a motto or a phrase. It was like, you know, you recruit a sailor, you recruit the individual, but you retain the family. So if you want somebody, if you're going to make the investment in someone coming in, and this probably holds true for the, you know, the Air Force, the Army, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, you know, you really have to make an investment in the person and the family, and make sure that the services are there, because the demands that you place on a service member, you have parallel demands on the family as well. The moves, I mean, when you get transferred, your whole family transfers with you typically. When you have to set up a new household, you got to make new friends, you got to get new schools, all of that kind of stuff. So it's a significant impact on the family. And so the first thing I'll say is the investment and the recognition and all of the resources that have been put into family support and family services, I think it's gone a long way. It not only does it allow us to recruit and retain kind of a better force, a higher intellect, you know, the tear line for whether or not you're eligible for military service, it used to be, you know, way back when, if you have a pulse, you can be in. I mean, now at the bare minimum, I don't think we even have, it's probably less than a 1% that don't have high school diplomas when they enlist. So, you know, the quality of the force has gone up. It's an all volunteer force, so you're not forcing anybody in through a draft. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would point out that I think has really changed over time is the compensation package. Whereas when I was growing up, I had 5 brothers and sisters, and my dad was in the Navy. My mom stayed home and took care of the family. So, we were not going on, grand family vacations. And when we did, it was all 7 of us loaded up in a station wagon to go someplace. And it usually wasn't places like Paris, France, that you can't get to in a station wagon, or London or anything like that. It was something in the U.S.
Yeah.
So the compensation has really kind of caught pace with, the quality of the force.
Yeah.
And so I think we've been able to retain a much more robust force and a better force, because the compensation is appropriate for what we're asking, the demands that we're asking of people.
Yeah. When I came into service, it was generally understood that service pay was way lower than the community around you. And it was thought that, well, you had benefits in the basic exchange and that kind of thing. And
True.
if you stayed in, you got a retirement out of it, and that was good. But but the actual pay, even with those benefits, was really below the community standard. I remember 1965 was my first payday. I went to the Bank of Hawaii to deposit my check. By the way, the teller is the girl I married, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Just sharing.
Did she like you before your first check deposit?
Well, I'm going to tell you about that engagement. It was really interesting. But anyway, my paycheck for 2 weeks of work as a Lieutenant JG was $112. That was my check. It wasn't much money. Yeah, and what happened is, I wanted to date a local girl. She was a nice local girl, so I slipped her a note with my deposit slip, and I said, "Would you have dinner with me?" And she looked at it. It was like out of a Woody Allen movie. She looked at me, and then she looked up, and she said, "I do not have dinner with Howley boys." And I was crushed. I said, "Oh my God, what happened here?"
Challenge.
This didn't work at all. So I was ready to walk away, my tail between my legs, and wait. She said, "But I'll have lunch with you."
Nice.
And the rest is history. The point, though, is that it wasn't much money then, and it's better now. And I guess what I hear you saying is that in doing that, you achieve a happier sailor. He's happy to be in the service, and he has a life, a career, so he's not troubled with the kinds of things that, a lack of predictability, a lack of economic success, impose on you, make it harder for you, and because you're not sure of where you're going, what you're doing. And the other thing, of course, is that if you have better education, and if you are able to recruit and train a better workforce, you're going to have a better product, right? I mean, it's going to be a better force, more effective, whatever they do.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about national defense, you want the best you can get. Second place is first loser, so you always want to be the best when it comes to that piece of it. Another piece of it is, and you kind of touched on it, is you got a happy sailor. So, and that could be an airman or marine. So I'll stick with sailor because that's what I'm accustomed to. But when the ship goes to sea, the last thing you want is, the crew worrying about what's happening on the beach. Whether the paycheck is going to get deposited in their account, whether they're going to have enough money to put, food on the table, and so a lot of the focus on, the family programs, and then the communication, internet, like you pretty much get internet on any ship anywhere. Indian Ocean, Atlantic, it does not matter. So you've got communication. So the ability to have, relatively speaking, constant communication, it keeps the lines of connection there. And so, you're not sitting on watch worrying about what's going on, because you kind of pretty much already know what's going on. Another big difference, this is completely separate from compensation and all that, though, is I'll say our broadening of demographics in the military. It used to be an all-male force, and then we introduced females into the military.
That was a challenge.
Particularly it was a challenge, but I'll tell you, that may have been a challenge, but that is a success story today. When I came in, my first ship was all male, my second ship was all male, my third ship was all male, and when I got to my fourth ship, it was an integrated ship. So we had, out of about 350 people, I think we had about 100 females. And while I thought it was a lot of fun and games on my first 3 ships, guys took significant pride in things that you can only do amongst other men. It was a lot more, I'll just call it decent, and everybody kind of felt better because everybody acted like regular folks. You sit down at the dinner table and it's not just a bunch of guys, you've got ladies, you got gentlemen, And I just felt it was good. And on the, take it even a step further, the performance of women relative to the performance of men, in my observation, at least on sea duty, on ships, there's no difference. I mean, the sex didn't make a difference. They were just as good as the guys. And in many cases, they were the top folks in their, whatever their group was.
Let me be the devil's advocate, though.
Sure.
Back in the sailing days, way back when, it was a macho thing, and the more you could swear, the higher up you were in the social order. And, tell sea stories and dirty stories and what have you, and do all those masculine, macho things. That was part, that pecking order thing was part of the social life of somebody on a ship. In fact, the other services as well. Now take that away. It's gone. It should be gone, but it is gone. The question is, do you still have killers? Do you still have people who are, as aggressive in a battlefield situation as before? Or does that sort of smooth the edges and make them less aggressive when you need them to be aggressive in a battlefield situation?
Yeah, so my personal observation, the last ship I commanded, we did a combat deployment to the Persian Gulf, and women and men were equally, I won't say they were aggressive, but equally as prepared, capable to do their mission, irrespective of the circumstances around us. And, we had a couple of brushes with danger, and, people did their job because they were trained and educated and, and knew what they were doing and knew that things were being taken care of. They had the right equipment. They had, all the stuff that they needed to be able to effectively execute their mission. And it didn't matter if they were a man or a woman. And I didn't see guys get more squeamish and women get squeamish. I mean, it was people, because at the end of it, what you have is a professional military member, okay? And it doesn't matter if they're, X or Y chromosome. It's a military member, they're a professional, and professionals do their job. It's kind of the same thing if you go to a hospital, do female surgeons, are they better or worse than male surgeons? I mean, some probably are, some probably aren't, but it's the same thing. It doesn't really matter. They're trained for what they're supposed to do, they're educated for it, they're prepared for it, they're volunteers, and they operate like professionals. And so I think it's great because I think it reflects kind of the broader society, so it's not so different. And that lack of that difference makes it better.
It's a great American success story, actually.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were a lot of people in the service who were kicking and screaming about this when it first happened, saying, we can't have women on a ship, that's impossible. But now, it's integrated completely, and it's to our credit, our collective national credit, that we have done this, and well. This is a very nice thing, and the other organizations in the country could take a lesson from what's happened in the military about women. But I'd ask one more challenge question with you, and that is, what about sex? If you put men and women together, in the forecastle, don't they think about each other? Don't they get involved in a little trouble? A little trouble's got to happen. You know that going in. Trouble that wouldn't happen if there was only one sex there. How do you deal with it? How successful have we been in coping with that special electric magnetism that happens between men and women?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. And I think that the services, each service has got their own very specific guidance. But within the Navy, that guidance has evolved over time. And so we've got rules on fraternization, which is inappropriate relationships between senior and subordinates. It can also apply to inappropriate relationships between men and women. In a military organization, you have a hierarchy. There are no two equals. No two people are exactly equal. So you always have a senior-subordinate relationship to some extent. When I had command of my last ship, it was mixed gender, so there was probably roughly 100 females out of about a 300-person crew. Mm-hmm. And the approach I took was this: look, at the end of the day, when we sail, we're a unit, and we have to operate like a unit. And I'm okay with people being friends. You can be good friends. You can be best friends. You can be shipmates, which is really what I was encouraging, which is professional, comrades. But there's nothing value added to a relationship on the ship, And what can happen, though, is because the ship is only, this particular one was 505 feet long and 65 feet wide, if I got my specs right, and it's got a draft of 30-something feet. So, contained within this steel, place, this ship, there's nowhere to go. It's kind of like high school, like you can go to the gym or you can go to the lunchroom or you can go to class, but there's no place to go. Like you can never leave.
Yeah.
And so, when you have the inevitable, the relationship fails, or, I saw you talking to him and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That actually erodes combat readiness. That was my perspective. And so I told folks, look, you can do anything as long as there's no exchange of anything. If you hold hands and sweat commingles, you've crossed the line. And so that's the threshold. So just don't go there. And so what happens if people do go there? Well, you address it. But what I found in my particular case was people respected that because they knew that was the rule set. Now, did people violate that? Yeah. I know people did. I know after the fact people did, which is fine. But people, I think what they did, in my case, was they kept it at such a low level and didn't allow it to just kind of blossom like, high school romance, if you will, that they were able to operate professionally.
Yeah.
Now, I think that the guidance has evolved, and I'm not in the Navy right now, so I don't know what they're specifically telling them, but at the end of the day, people are people, right? And so they're going to do what they're going to do. But if you've got rules and you've got guidance and you've got limitations, then responsible adults are going to respect that, and they're going to operate under those premises.
Yeah, and you hold them to that, and
Yeah.
it works. It works. We're going to take a short break, but I did
Sure.
one observation before we do, and that is, all of these topics we're discussing are worthy shows to drill down on going forward. Really interesting stuff. We haven't really scratched the surface on a lot of this, but you will do going forward.
I will.
That's Jeff James. We're talking about the military in Hawaii. We're talking about sea changes in the military. We'll be right back.
You're watching Think Tech Hawaii, 25 talk shows by 25 dedicated hosts every week, helping us to explore and understand the issues and events in and affecting our state. Great content for Hawaii from Think Tech.
Aloha, this is Reg Baker and I am the host of Business in Hawaii. We talk about positive stories of businesses in Hawaii, how they have been successful, and how they have overcome some of the obstacles that a lot of us encounter when we try to have a business here. And believe it or not, there are a number of positive stories here, and we want to talk to all of you. So we broadcast live every Thursday at 2 o'clock, and it rebroadcasts again on Olelo Channel 54. So I sure hope to see you next time. Please tune in on Thursdays at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here talking about the military in Hawaii with Jeff James, a retired Navy captain. So, I'd like to talk about sort of the way careers work. And one really important issue that I noticed when I was in the service, and I was only in the service 6 years, so my view is limited to that. But it was all about training. It was training for everything. And you really had to take the training seriously, because next time you looked, somebody would expect you to know the training.
Right.
And then when I got out of the service, on these shores, I found that there wasn't nearly as much of a value on training in the civilian population, which makes a difference. So can you talk about training in the military? You were both enlisted and officers, so can you compare them as well?
Sure. So when I joined the Navy, I joined it as a seaman recruit, E1. I mean, the very, I won't say the bottom of the barrel, but the entry level, okay, entry level. And I went through a training program after boot camp. Well, boot camp itself was training, and the training there is to learn how to have discipline and to learn how to follow orders, lawful orders, of course, not unlawful ones,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
and how to have discipline and a sense of rigor in what you're doing, because and attention to detail. Very important one is attention to detail, because while you may not know it at the time when you're first, in the Navy, after 30 years, I can look back and say every one of those lessons that I was taught, all of those things that we were drilled down on and almost beat on to make sure that we got it right, had a purpose. And most of those things, withstood the test of time throughout my career. So I went to a vocational training through the Navy for the specialty I was going to do, which was data processing technician. And so I thought, when I read the brochure, it talked about computers. It was a little bit less the computers when I went through the training, but that was okay, because I actually got into computers a little bit on my first ship and did that. Through a series of good fortune and some hard work and a little bit of self-study on my part, I was able to get into an officer assessment program. And I got a Navy ROTC scholarship and went to college. and then ended up as an officer in the fleet. So, the training I got as an enlisted sailor was equally as important as the training that I got as a naval officer. And so when we get to the fleet, we constantly train. You're constantly doing drills over and over and over.
What does it mean? What's a drill and what's constant?
A drill, well, constant I'd say is, at every opportunity. So for example, on a ship, when the ship is tied up to the pier in port, at least during my time, I don't know what they do now, but I'm sure it's probably the same. We would have, at the end of the workday, we would have a fire drill on the ship every single day. Without fail, we did a fire drill. Because, on a ship at sea, you can't call 911 and get the fire department. You are your own fire department. So a fire or flooding are the two, most near dangers to any ship. I mean, combat is a distant danger to, sinking in the waters just south of Pearl Harbor. So, we train to put out fires and we train to stop flooding. And so we
life
go
and death.
over.
Both of those things are life and
It
death.
is, and there's, when you're on a ship, again, X number of feet long and wide, I mean, you only have yourself, and so, that falls under the broader category of damage control, but that's an area that we constantly train on. And everybody has to be able to do it, and everybody has to be able to step in for the next person in case something happens to that person. So, we would do training on that. And what you want to get to is the point in training, particularly in the military, such that if you're under adverse conditions with a lot of pressure, like let's say there's actually a fire, well, training, in a fire drill is different than an actual fire.
Yeah.
All of a sudden people get tunnel vision. You want them to have done it so many times that it almost just becomes rote. They don't even have to think. It's more just a natural response or a reflex, and they go through it. And so, that holds true whether it's something as simple as, a fire drill on a ship, all the way to, going through a launch sequence to shoot a missile, under combat conditions. So the focus on training is constant and persistent. Now, how does that training get delivered? Technology has allowed us a variety of different ways to deliver that training.
More all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you can do, like on an Aegis class destroyer, which I commanded, we could simulate inside the ship conditions that were identical to being kind of in the field, if you will, on deployment in a hostile, area. Yeah. And you couldn't tell the difference. And so you go through it enough times, and people really understand and have ingrained in them what they need to do. So the technology's allowed us to do that training in port. We can do simulations at sea so that we don't have to expend, taxpayer dollars for weapons, launching missiles and stuff like that.
Right.
And we do it to validate that the system will work.
Right.
But the bulk of the training, can happen without having to expend those resources. So the technology has allowed us to, develop a stronger, better force at a lower cost.
Right. Because of the simulation. Yeah.
The simulation. But on top of training is also the education piece, because training teaches you how to do something, but the services have long ago figured out that education will provide you with people that not only know how to do something, but know how to think and how to solve problems that aren't prescribed in a manual. And so there's been a really strong push to educate the force. Now, by and large, the officer corps are all college educated. Traditionally, the enlisted force was not educated, through college.
Has that changed now?
That has changed incredibly. I mean, there's a huge push, and to get people to go to college, even while they're on active duty, whether it's through online courses, when the ship's going to be in port. I mean, you name it. But what you get, irrespective of whether they could be studying English literature, for example.
Yeah.
But you get a more thoughtful person. You get somebody with a little higher level of intellect. And if you believe, like I do, that more education is always better, you end up with a better force. You end up with a stronger force, and a more capable force.
Yeah, even English literature, you got to read. You got to understand words, and understanding words is the way to communicate.
Yep.
And so, what I heard you saying too in the drill and the constant drilling, is that it's not only that you're at your screen doing your job and doing it the best you can. But you are beginning to understand the group as a whole and your role in that group.
Right.
You see the picture from the commander's eyes. You see it from the group's eyes. You understand the whole entity. And you need a certain intellectual ability to do that, but you also need the training to sort of internalize that. So it takes me to something you and I talked about once, and that's the notion of command climate. You know, because commanders are different now. You're different than commanders I remember. It came out in the Ahime Maru case, which I covered for PBS. The Board of Inquiry that was involved there was very interested in the notion of command climate. They wanted the commander to be able to engender a relationship with each man or woman on the bridge, so that the commander would trust every individual to be able to speak to him and tell him when something was going wrong. And each man on the bridge, each woman on the bridge, had to feel free enough in the command climate to be able to open up and say, "Commander, wait a minute, this is wrong, can't do this." And that was missing, according to the Board of Inquiry, in the Ahime Maru case. But it revealed to me anyway that the command climate on Navy ships and probably in other military command situations is different now. Care to comment?
Sure. So the first thing to your point about command climate and command, you know, at the end of the day, the commander of the unit has ultimate responsibility and accountability for, you know, whatever happens with his unit. Okay, so that piece of it never went away. The authority, the responsibility, and the accountability, it never got diluted. But what, you know, the services have recognized is that, you know, if you empower your crew, and this is the approach I took, you know, in the command tours that I had, that was to empower the crew. And so the two ships I commanded, you know, I viewed myself as, my number one job was the morale officer. If the morale of the crew was good, and, you know, I had to press the big fat I believe button that they'd all been properly trained before they got to the ship, because I knew they were trained well on the ship, but if they had the right technical skills coming to the ship, and the morale was good, things would pretty much take care of themselves. And so I would be able to do what I thought my job really was, which was to sit back and be the safety net for the ship. You know, I was the eyes and ears that watched to make sure things were going right. Now, let's take, for example, when you're parking a ship at the pier, okay? I mean, it's kind of the same as landing an aircraft, right? Except for when you park a ship at the pier, it takes a lot of people. You know, it's not just one person doing it. So there's a, you know, infinite variety of ways and commands that you can give to manipulate the power and the rudder and the line handlers and all that kind of stuff, right? And so when I was young in the Navy, most of my COs at the early part of my career were giving the directions. I mean, they were like saying when to throw a line over, when to turn the rudder, how much power to use. And so they were in the problem. And,
okay.
And I saw situations where, because they were in the problem, nobody could see if there was another problem developing because they were part of it already. And back then, the general, you know, I'll say the persona was, you didn't want to tell the captain he was wrong, because that usually didn't end well for you. So people were very, you know, they were almost like, I won't say frightened, but very reticent to, you know, point something out that wasn't right. And so, you know, as I grew up in the Navy, you know, I made a couple of promises to myself. And one was, you know, I'm going to watch what's good and try to emulate it. I'm going to watch what I don't think is good and never repeat it. And that was one of the things I thought wasn't all that good, was people not being able to tell you, you know, you're making a mistake, kind of like the emperor, you have no clothes.
Yeah.
I mean, so you've got to set a little bit of ego aside to empower your crew, and then stand back and be that safety net. And so they may not do it exactly the way that you're going to do it, but that doesn't matter. If they're doing it okay, they're doing it safely, and they get you there, then you've kept yourself in the position where, you know, you're the safety net for the ship or for the unit. And when people do it and they're not getting told exactly how to do it, and they realize that they can do it, you know, what that does for somebody's, you know, sense of self-worth, right. What it does for the whole crew, right. That they did that not the captain did it, but that they did that. Right. And so kind of the climate of the crew gets better when you know, you could take it to, you know, just management by walking around, they call it. I would call it leadership by walking around. Yeah. You know, I made it a point every day when we were at sea to kind of walk end to end in the ship and talk to every single sailor. And so, you know, over the course of my 2 command tours, I mean, I knew every sailor. Now, I didn't know every sailor's complete history, but I knew most of them. I knew most of the problems. I could sit down with my command master chief and we could talk about, hey, you know, this guy, he's normally cheery, he's not cheery today. Why do you think that is? And so I could have my master chief go get with his chief and they could figure the problem out. And so those are all the pieces to command climate. And at the end of the day, if you've got a good command climate and you're properly resourced, you're going to be much more mission effective, and you're going to be able to do your job.
Wonderful, wonderful. And that's the modern approach, and that is command climate.
Yeah.
And we're out of time, so we'll close it down. That's Captain Jeff James talking about sea changes in the military and the Navy. This is going to be a great show, Jeff. We've only scratched the surface on so many things. I want to say, welcome aboard. Thanks for being part of Think Tech.
All right, well, thanks, Jay, and thanks for having me on the show, and I'm looking forward to it.
Aloha.
All right.